Truth has a strange power. It doesn't need permission to exist. It doesn't depend on belief. It doesn't bend itself to human preferences or traditions. Whether we accept it or not, the truth remains. And that is exactly why religion cannot survive it. The more light you shine on its claims, the more fragile they become. The more you test them against reality, the more they crumble. It is not hatred of religion that reveals this, but the fact that truth has no loyalty to stories, no matter how cherished they are. Religions depend on a delicate agreement between leaders and followers, the agreement to treat certain claims as unquestionable. This agreement is rarely written down, but it is everywhere, in sermons, in rituals, in how people raise their children. The moment those claims are subjected to the same tests as any other statement about the world, the foundation starts to crack. If a religion's ideas could truly stand on evidence alone, they would not need protection from doubt. Most faith systems start by offering answers to the biggest questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What happens after we die? But these answers are presented before any evidence is gathered. They are declared as fact, not because they have been demonstrated, but because they have been handed down. Once someone accepts these answers, they are encouraged to see the world only through that lens. And yet, the moment these claims are checked against history, archaeology, and science, they begin to shrink. When ancient texts are placed under honest examination, they reveal fingerprints of the time and place they were written. The moral codes reflect the politics, the prejudices, and the limited understanding of people living thousands of years ago. The scientific claims mirror what those societies thought about the Earth and the stars. Ideas we now know are wrong, and yet religion asks its followers to treat these writings as timeless and perfect. This demand is only possible if you shield the faithful from the full truth of how those texts came to be. History is filled with examples of this shielding. For centuries, religious authorities controlled literacy, deciding which books people could read. In some places, translating holy texts into the common language was a crime. This wasn't to protect the people's faith. It was to protect the religion from the people's understanding. When knowledge spread, when ordinary people could compare scripture to reality, cracks appeared that could never be sealed again. One of the strongest proofs that religion cannot survive truth is how fiercely it resists transparency. If a belief system's claims were as solid as granite, why fear open debate? Why censor alternative views? Why threaten eternal punishment for asking the wrong questions? The answer is simple. Because those questions work. They reveal inconsistencies. They expose contradictions between the promised perfection of the doctrine and the messy reality of its origins. The same pattern repeats in every religion. At first, it thrives by giving people a sense of certainty in a confusing world. But certainty built on untested claims is fragile. Eventually, reality intrudes. Archaeology uncovers evidence that doesn't match the sacred story. Linguistics shows that prophecies were written after the events they predicted. Biology explains life's diversity without any need for divine intervention. Astronomy reveals a universe far older and larger than the one described in holy books. Each discovery chips away at the story. The strength of truth lies in the fact that it can be tested endlessly and still remain. The weakness of religion lies in the fact that it must be protected from that process. That is why religious apologists often shift the conversation away from evidence and toward emotion. They speak about meaning, community, and personal experience. These are real human needs, but they are not proof of the supernatural claims at the heart of the faith. By wrapping unproven ideas in emotional comfort, religion hopes to shield itself from scrutiny. You can see this in how believers respond to contradictions. When a prophecy fails, they reinterpret it. When moral commands in Scripture become clearly unjust, they claim the verse is taken out of context. When science explains something their holy book got wrong, they say it was never meant to be read literally. Each adjustment is an attempt to keep the belief alive, not by confronting the truth, but by bending the belief to avoid it. In every other part of life, truth strengthens what it touches. If a bridge design is tested and found sound, it earns trust. If a medicine passes rigorous trials, it saves lives. But when religious claims are tested, they almost never pass without modification. And this is the difference between truth and belief. Truth invites challenge, belief fears it. Even the way religions teach morality reveals their vulnerability to truth. Many present their moral laws as universal and eternal. Yet, when we compare them across cultures and centuries, we see that these laws shift according to human needs, not divine commands. Rules that were once declared sacred, from dietary laws to rules about slavery, have been abandoned when they no longer fit the society that practiced them. If morality were truly dictated by an unchanging God, it would not evolve. That evolution is not evidence of divine wisdom. It's evidence of human authorship. Religious institutions have always had to choose between adapting to the truth or losing relevance. This is why some now accept scientific facts they once rejected. The Catholic Church once condemned the idea that the earth orbits the sun. Today it accepts it, not because Scripture changed, but because denial became impossible. Each adaptation is a concession to reality, and each concession proves that the original claim was never as certain as it was presented. The truth is not an enemy to be fought. It is the most reliable guide we have. But for religion, truth is dangerous because it operates on a simple principle. Claims must match reality. And when your central claims about creation, about history, about morality fail that test, the only way to keep them alive is to hide them behind fear, tradition, or selective teaching. The moment a person commits to following the evidence wherever it leads, their relationship with religion changes. Some try to hold on by redefining their beliefs, making them vague enough to avoid contradiction. Others walk away entirely. In both cases, it is not hatred or rebellion that drives the change. It is simply that truth has no patience for unsupported claims. The story of religion in the modern world is the story of a shrinking island. Every new discovery, every historical document, every scientific breakthrough erodes its shores. The land it stands on becomes smaller, forcing it to retreat into more abstract and less testable territory. And as it retreats, it becomes harder for it to control the minds of those who have seen the map of the whole world. This is why the rise of free information is such a threat to faith. In the past, you could grow up in a community where everyone believed the same story, where questioning was dangerous and information was scarce. Now, a single search can bring you access to scholars, scientists, and historical records from across the globe. Once you have that knowledge, going back to the untested claims feels like going from sunlight to darkness. And yet, religion will not stop trying. It will adapt, soften its edges, and claim that it was always compatible with new discoveries. It will present itself as metaphor when its literal claims are disproven. It will shift from ruling nations to influencing culture. But no matter how much it changes its clothing, the truth remains the same. Any claim that cannot face evidence without collapsing is not truth. And over time, people notice. The collapse is not sudden. It is not a single dramatic moment where the world abandons all belief. It is quieter, a slow erosion of certainty. Fewer young people accept the faith of their parents without question. More congregations close their doors as attendance drops. Seminaries train ministers who no longer take their own doctrines literally. This is how truth wins, not by attacking, but by standing still while the falsehoods exhaust themselves, trying to hold on. The more people learn about the origins of their faith, the harder it becomes to keep the old illusions intact. Many religious leaders quietly admit this in private. They study ancient languages, compare manuscripts, and see the inconsistencies up close. They know that whole passages have been added or altered over time, that translations often change the meaning, that some books once considered holy were later removed entirely. Yet when they step into the pulpit, they present the text as unchanging and perfect. That gap between what they know and what they preach is one of the clearest signs that religion cannot stand openly beside the truth. When a belief system is built on certainty, its survival depends on controlling the narrative. That is why history is so often sanitized in religious education. The bloody conflicts, the political power grabs, the moments where doctrine was decided by vote. These are minimized or left out entirely. The idea is to create a clean, unbroken line from divine revelation to present-day worship. But reality is never that tidy. The truth is filled with debates, splinters, forgeries, and human ambition. And when people discover those parts of the story, the authority of the institution suffers. Consider the way religions handle failed prophecies. In any other area of life, if someone made a prediction that failed, their credibility would vanish. But within religion, the failure is explained away or reinterpreted until it appears as though nothing went wrong. In some cases, entire denominations have formed around adjusting the date of an expected event, over and over again, as each one passes without result. If truth were the highest priority, a single failure would end the claim. But the need to preserve belief outweighs the commitment to reality. Religions also rely on selective memory when it comes to morality. They highlight the verses that sound compassionate while ignoring those that endorse cruelty. They praise the supposed moral clarity of Scripture, even when those same texts allow practices that most of the modern world now considers immoral, from the subjugation of women to the owning of slaves. When confronted with these verses, apologists often insist they are no longer applicable, as if morality can expire like food on a shelf. That quiet admission that certain eternal commands no longer fit is another way truth erodes the claim of divine authorship. Even the personal testimonies often used as proof of religion's truth are vulnerable to honest examination. People speak of answered prayers, miraculous healings, feelings of peace they attribute to the divine. Yet when these experiences are tested under controlled conditions, they look identical to psychological responses found in non-religious contexts. The same sense of peace can be induced through meditation, nature, or music. The same healing outcomes occur when people receive medical care, regardless of whether they prayed. The truth here is not that people don't have profound experiences. It's that those experiences do not point uniquely to one faith or one God. This is why, in every generation, there are people who quietly drift away from their religion. They may never have intended to leave. They may have started by simply asking small questions about a verse that doesn't seem moral, about a story that doesn't fit with known history, about a prayer that went unanswered. The more they followed those questions, the more they found answers that contradicted what they had been told. And the more they trusted those answers, the less they could reconcile them with the old beliefs. The internet has accelerated this process in ways that religious authorities cannot fully control. A young person can read ancient texts side by side in their original languages, compare archaeological findings, watch debates between scholars, and see the same questions they have asked being asked by thousands of others. This access doesn't just provide information, it provides confirmation that doubt is not a moral failing, but a natural result of seeking the truth. The fear that religion has of truth is often disguised as concern for morality. Leaders warn that without faith, society will lose its moral compass. But history shows that morality is not the product of religion alone. Societies that have moved away from organized religion have not descended into chaos. In many cases, they have stronger protections for human rights, more equality, and greater levels of trust between citizens. If morality depended on religious belief, we would expect to see the most devout nations leading the world in justice and compassion. Yet, that is not what the data shows. The real danger for religion is not that people will become immoral without it, but that they will realize they can be moral without it. Once that realization takes hold, the central claim that religion is necessary begins to collapse. The truth that human beings can develop ethics, empathy, and cooperation without divine instruction is a direct threat to the structure of religious authority. It removes the need for an external source to define right and wrong, placing that responsibility in human hands. This is why even mild questioning is often met with hostility in deeply religious settings. The response is rarely to engage with the facts directly. Instead, the doubter is accused of arrogance, rebellion, or even spiritual danger. Fear is used to keep them from looking too closely. The pattern is consistent. When the truth threatens to unravel the belief attacks the truth teller rather than addressing the truth itself. And yet, the truth does not go away. It waits patiently, in books, in data, in the quiet recognition people feel when something doesn't add up. Once a person has seen a contradiction, they cannot unsee it. They can pretend for a while, they can push it aside, but it will return whenever the belief is tested. The more contradictions they notice, the more their faith requires active effort to maintain. Belief becomes less about trust and more about willpower. Religions often speak of themselves as eternal and unchanging, but their histories show constant evolution. doctrines shift, interpretations expand or contract, and practices once seen as sacred fade into history. Each of these changes is an adaptation to the pressure of truth. When reality proves a claim false, the belief must either abandon it or risk losing followers. This adaptability keeps religions alive in form, but it also reveals that they are not anchored in absolute truth, because truth does not need to change to fit the times. Some believers try to make peace between their faith and reality by treating religious stories as symbolic rather than literal. This can preserve a sense of meaning without requiring the stories to be factually true. But even this approach is a concession. It is an acknowledgement that the literal claims cannot survive the evidence. And once those claims are abandoned, the religion is no longer the same thing it was. It becomes a cultural or philosophical tradition rather than a statement about reality. The truth doesn't need to replace meaning or community. It doesn't require tearing down the parts of human connection that religion sometimes provides. But it does require honesty about what is supported by evidence and what is not. And when people apply that standard to their beliefs, they often find that the supernatural claims cannot keep up. The stories might remain, but their authority fades. What is left is a choice: cling to the comfort of belief despite knowing its flaws, or step into the uncertainty of truth. The first option preserves a sense of security, but only by ignoring contradictions. The second option may feel less certain, but it allows growth, adaptation, and alignment with reality. Over time, more people choose the second path, not because they set out to destroy religion, but because they could no longer unsee the truth. Religion can survive in ignorance. It can survive in isolation. It can survive when questions are silenced and alternative information is kept out. But in the open air, where claims are tested and evidence is shared freely, it struggles. The same light that helps science thrive causes religion's most central claims to fade. That is not an accident. It is the natural result of bringing untested stories into contact with a world that measures truth by reality, not tradition. The future of religion depends on how well it can avoid that contact. But the future of humanity depends on how willing we are to seek it. The most telling proof that religion cannot survive truth is found in the moments when it is confronted with undeniable facts. When new archaeological findings contradict a sacred timeline, the faithful are urged to reinterpret the text. When DNA evidence reveals human origins that stretch far beyond the scope of creation. Stories, the faithful are told, the stories are metaphorical. Each time reality speaks clearly, religion's literal claims retreat into vagueness. And every retreat is an admission, even if unspoken, that the truth is not on their side. Religious systems are built on a promise of certainty. They claim to have the answers before the questions are even fully understood. But in truth, certainty without evidence is just an illusion carefully maintained. It works only as long as no one tests it. Once tested, the illusion shatters into smaller and smaller pieces, until the believer is left holding fragments that no longer fit together. We see this pattern repeated across cultures and faiths. A creation myth is cherished until geology, paleontology, and cosmology map out a timeline that dwarfs the myth entirely. A miracle story is accepted until historical records, or the absence of them, show that the event could not have happened as told. A moral law is defended as eternal until society recognizes its cruelty and discards it. The truth doesn't arrive with fanfare. It simply stands there, unshaken, as belief quietly alters itself to survive another day. And yet, religion does not admit defeat when its claims are proven false. Instead, it reshapes itself, blending with the truth just enough to appear compatible while keeping its supernatural core untouched. This tactic is not a sign of strength, it's a survival mechanism. The truth needs no such adaptation. Gravity does not change to align with Scripture. The age of the universe is not adjusted to fit an ancient calendar. The speed of light doesn't slow down because a religious leader says it should. Truth is indifferent to belief. This indifference is what makes truth so powerful, and, for religion, so dangerous. A doctrine can command loyalty, inspire rituals, and shape laws, but none of that will alter the reality of the world. The earth still turns on its axis. Diseases still follow biological patterns. Human behavior still responds to social and evolutionary pressures, Regardless of how many sermons are preached about the soul, the more people see that the world works the same way whether or not a belief is true, the less power that belief holds. Religions often frame this loss of power as a moral crisis, warning that society will crumble without faith. But the evidence contradicts that fear. Countries with lower levels of religious belief often rank higher in measures of education, life expectancy, happiness, and equality. The decline of religion has not plunged these societies into chaos. In many cases, it has freed them to build systems of morality and cooperation based on shared human needs rather than divine command. This is another reason religion cannot survive the truth. The truth reveals that it is not the sole source of what makes us good. If compassion, justice, and cooperation can thrive without belief, then belief loses its monopoly on morality. And when that monopoly disappears, the fear of life without religion begins to fade. It is telling that so many religious teachings warn against questioning, instructing followers to avoid certain books, ideas, or people is not a strategy used by something that can stand on its own. You don't have to warn people not to question the boiling point of water or the existence of mountains, because those truths can be verified by anyone. You only have to protect claims that cannot survive independent verification. Over time, the accumulation of these protected claims becomes impossible to ignore. A believer might overlook one inconsistency, or two, or even 10. But as the list grows, maintaining faith requires more mental effort than accepting reality. Some resolve this tension by redefining their beliefs until they bear little resemblance to the original. Others let the belief go entirely. Either way, the religion they once held no longer exists in its old form. Even attempts to blend religion with science often expose the problem rather than solve it. When a religious group embraces certain scientific truths but rejects others, it reveals that its acceptance of reality is selective. It accepts what does not threaten its core claims and rejects what does. But science is not a menu from which you can pick the comfortable parts. The methods that gave us modern medicine and space travel are the same methods that contradict the timelines, miracles, and cosmologies of ancient texts. To accept one and reject the other is not balance. It's an admission of bias. Some argue that religion can coexist with truth by staying in the realm of personal meaning rather than factual claims. In this form, religious stories are seen as metaphors for human experience rather than descriptions of reality. This approach removes the immediate conflict with evidence, but it also removes the authority of religion to dictate what is real. If a creation story is only symbolic, it cannot be used to argue against evolution. If a miracle is only a metaphor, it cannot be used as proof of divine power. Without factual claims, religion becomes tradition, art, or philosophy. Valuable to some, but no longer the keeper of truth it claims to be. This is the path many modern believers take, often without realizing it. They keep the rituals, the community, and the cultural identity, but let go of the parts that can't survive scrutiny. They may still use the language of faith, but their relationship to it has changed. In practice, they have accepted that truth holds a higher position than doctrine, even if they do not say so outright. The more this happens, the more the original form of the religion fades. Its influence over laws, education, and culture weakens. Its grip on morality loosens. Its claim to absolute truth erodes. And while it may survive as a cultural memory or a source of symbolic meaning, it no longer functions as an unquestionable authority. In this way, truth does not destroy religion in a single blow. It erodes it through countless small realizations, each one chipping away at the walls built to keep doubt out. A conversation here, a book there, a moment of noticing a contradiction. These moments accumulate until the belief can no longer hold its original shape. By the time the believer admits it, the change has already happened. This is why, in the long run, religion cannot survive the truth. It can adapt, rebrand, and reinterpret, but each adaptation is a retreat from the claim that it holds unchanging, absolute answers. Every concession to reality is a confession that the original claim was wrong, and once people learn to trust reality over tradition, there is no going back. The truth will outlast every doctrine, every prophecy, and every ritual. It doesn't require belief to remain real. It doesn't demand loyalty, and it doesn't punish doubt. It simply exists, waiting for anyone willing to see it, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. Throughout history, there have been moments when the truth struck so directly at the heart of religious claims that the effects could not be hidden. The printing press made it possible for ordinary people to read sacred texts themselves, without a priest or minister deciding what passages to share. The results were immediate. Disagreements over interpretation exploded, and the authority of centralized religious power weakened. If the texts had truly been self-evident in their perfection, reading them in full should have unified believers, not divided them. But instead, the closer people looked, the more differences they saw. Centuries later, the discovery of fossils painted a picture of life on Earth that stretched far beyond the reach of religious timelines. Instead of a few thousand years, the history of life spanned hundreds of millions. This was not a minor correction. It was a complete rewriting of the story. Faith leaders could have embraced this truth and reimagined their beliefs around it, but most resisted, accusing scientists of dishonesty or arrogance. The more evidence piled up, the more elaborate the defenses became. And every elaborate defense was further proof that religion was bending itself around reality rather than standing alongside it. In our own time, genetic research has traced the ancestry of humanity back to common origins with other species. This is not a guess or a philosophical idea. It is the result of decades of consistent, repeatable evidence. It tells us that the human story is part of a much larger tapestry of life, not an isolated act of divine creation. For those whose faith depends on humans being set apart, this is a devastating truth. For those willing to accept it, it is a humbling and beautiful one. And yet, the faith systems that rely on the old version of the story continue to push back, because acceptance would mean letting go of too much. The irony is that truth and wonder are not enemies. Knowing that stars are massive spheres of burning gas does not make them less beautiful. Understanding that rainbows are formed by refraction does not make them less magical to see. But religion often presents truth as a thief, something that steals the mystery and meaning of life. In reality, truth deepens mystery by replacing the unknown with the genuinely astonishing. It is the clinging to false certainty that limits wonder, not the evidence that expands it. Religious traditions sometimes survive by shifting their focus from factual claims to emotional ones. They stop trying to prove that their stories are literally true and instead emphasize the sense of belonging, comfort, and purpose they provide. This strategy can keep a community alive, but it changes what religion is. When the factual core is hollowed out, what remains is culture, heritage, and habit, important in their own ways, but no longer the keeper of ultimate truth they claim to be. What makes this transition difficult is that religion is often tied to identity. To question the belief feels like questioning the self, the family, and the community. This is why many people stay even when they know parts of their faith are not true. The cost of leaving feels too high. And yet, history shows that the longer the truth is resisted, the more sudden and disruptive the eventual shift becomes. Truth does not require that we abandon all traditions or communities. It requires only that we are honest about what is real. A ritual can be meaningful without being magical. A story can be inspiring without being historically accurate. But as long as religion insists that its stories are both meaningful and factual, in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary, it will always be at odds with the truth. The most profound shifts happen not in public debates or grand revelations, but in the quiet moments when a single question pierces the armor of certainty. A parent wonders why an all-knowing God would test people without telling them the rules clearly. A student notices that moral lessons in Scripture are contradicted by other passages. A believer prays desperately for a miracle and receives silence. These moments accumulate, and each one is a reminder that belief is not the same as truth. As generations change, these quiet realizations become more common. Young people grow up with access to the full spectrum of information, historical records, scientific discoveries, philosophical debates. They see that different religions make the same kinds of exclusive claims, and that they cannot all be right. They begin to recognize patterns, the repetition of miracle stories across cultures, the alignment of moral rules with the needs of the society that created them. The way God's commands always seem to match the prejudices of their followers. Once these patterns are seen, they cannot be unseen. And here lies the core problem for religion. The truth is cumulative. Once you learn a fact, it becomes part of your mental landscape. The effort to believe something contradictory requires constant maintenance. It is exhausting to hold two opposing ideas in the same mind and pretend they do not conflict. Over time, one of them has to give way. And because the truth is repeatable, verifiable, and consistent, it tends to outlast the belief. There will always be people who choose the comfort of belief over the challenge of reality, but the proportion shifts slowly, generation by generation, as the evidence grows and becomes harder to ignore. In this way, truth changes the world without needing armies or revolutions. It simply waits, unchanging, while human understanding catches up. Religion can still inspire art, community, and acts of kindness. But those things are not unique to religion. They are part of the human capacity for meaning-making and cooperation. When religion claims that it is the source of these things, the truth exposes the error, and once people know they can have beauty, morality, and purpose without belief in the supernatural, the fear of letting go begins to fade. The truth is patient. It does not argue endlessly with those who refuse to see it. It simply remains unaltered while beliefs shift, adapt, or disappear entirely. That is why religion cannot survive it in its original form. It can change into something else, something symbolic, cultural, or personal. But as the final authority on reality, it is no match for what is real. The story of the future will not be one of truth destroying religion in a single moment. It will be a gradual transformation as each generation inherits not only the traditions of the past, but also the accumulated truths discovered along the way. And each of those truths will be another weight on the scale, tipping it slowly but steadily toward reality. In the end, the truth will still be here. Religion, as we know it, will not.